Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar from the FIDO Alliance. This is the first in a four-part series where we're going to be diving into our new design guidelines. I'm Megan Shamus. I'm the CMO of the FIDO Alliance, and I'm here just to introduce the topic and our speakers and provide some housekeeping notes before we get started. So please help me to welcome James Huang, who's a senior product designer at Microsoft, Mitchell Gallivan, who's the lead authentication UXD at Google, and Kevin Goldman, who is a chief experience officer at Trusona. These three wonderful speakers also wear many hats. They are part of the UX working group within the FIDO Alliance, and Mitchell and Kevin are co-chairs of the UX working group. So everyone's favorite part of the webinar is me telling them about On24 and the housekeeping notes. So welcome to On24. You can see you have multiple widgets that you can leverage. Today, we're mostly going to be leveraging the slides widget as well as the media player, so you can see our speakers. So please ensure that you have those widgets open and they are the sound is turned on. We are recording the webinar, and you will be able to access this webcast following. So if there's anything that you miss, you certainly can come back and watch it. We also will be publishing the slides to our website, and we'll send those along to you as well. We will be saving time for Q&A as much as we can, so please ask your questions in the question widget that you see there. And then lastly, please do stay on at the conclusion of today's webcast and take the survey, because that is really what helps us to inform our educational materials and future webinars as well.
Hey, Megan, I have a question for you.
Okay. Did you put it in the widget?
Will the webinar be recorded?
The webinar is being recorded as we speak. So thank you. And you will be emailed directly after this with the link to access it. So this is what, so last year we did a similar series of webinars. If you were at Identiverse, we did unveil our newest design guidelines there. However, we were only really able to give folks a sneak peek in a 20-minute session during that event. So that's good news to everyone who was either there or wasn't able to make it to Identiverse, because now you can become immersed in our new design guidelines by attending this webinar series. So you can, if you registered for this event, you likely have registered for all of them, or you can go back to that multi-reg experience and register for all of these. Again, if you do register for these, even if you can't make it, you will have access to those recordings afterwards. So it probably is just worth it to register for all of them so you can go back and look at these recordings afterwards. So we have one on June 18th, June 25th, and July 2nd. And the last one, the one on July 2nd, will be an AMA. So if you're in the United States and you're gearing up for the 4th of July, why not join us for an AMA around UX and design for Passkeys? I can't think of anything else that would kick off kind of a holiday couple days, as I know I will be here with all of you for that. So I hope we have the link to register somewhere, like on the console. If not, I will ensure that we send that out to you all so you can do that action and register for all of these webinars. Mitchell, I would love to hand things off to you now to kick off our content today.
You got it. Thank you so much, Megan. And also, I love your Passkeys pillow in the background. It's super cute.
Shield.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I think, so why passwords aren't working, I think, is a really important topic. A lot of us know, but it's good to get a refresher, a reminder of why we're all putting so much work into Passkeys. There's lots of different reasons, but one of the big ones is that passwords are simply difficult for users to deal with. And users often forget their passwords, and paper is really the go-to method for storing passwords for a lot of users, which is less than ideal. And passwords are really easy to guess. And so around 33% of users in the US report having attempted to guess someone else's password, and 73% of those attempted guesses were actually successful, which is incredible to learn about. And also, passwords tend to be reused. So recycling passwords is risky. And it's a symptom of really how difficult it is to kind of keep and maintain and manage passwords. And then also, if we're reusing passwords and then somebody guessed our password, gosh, we're in a tough situation all of a sudden. And really, overall, users are very ready to move on from passwords. And we can see that in how they feel about each of these different kinds of biometrics, be it SMS or PIN codes or facial recognition or fingerprint scan. Like, folks are ready to move on from passwords, and they feel that these biometrics, especially fingerprint and facial scans, are more secure, which is awesome because that's what a lot of screen locks are today. And so, of course, passkeys use those screen locks to authenticate you. And also IT leaders around the world too that agree that passwords are simply too weak. They're way too weak way to secure data. And so we know that passkeys can simplify how users sign in. So they utilize those biometrics, which we have just seen that users feel very confident about. And we know that autofill can sometimes do things wrong, or maybe the passwords we want aren't stored in autofill because we have them written down on paper, like statistically speaking, or remembering and forgetting them, again, statistically speaking. So it's a really interesting problem to face, and passkeys can really help address that by taking that onus completely off the user. And also, passkeys are very accessible because they really depend on the platform, like iOS, Android, Windows, and Mac OS to sort of do the whole authentication experience, which is a really, really big benefit. And I would like to hand this off to Kevin.
Yeah, let's talk about transformation. So when we think about digital transformation, there's 4 real areas to it. Strategic, so that's transformation to move your business into new markets. There's operational transformation, adopting agile methods, using data more effectively, or automation. The third, which is what we're going to talk about today, is customer experience. So transforming your customer experience to be more seamless and require fewer steps to complete the same kinds of tasks. Lastly, just to round it out with digital transformation, there's also cultural transformation. That has to do with topics like creativity, continuous improvement, etc. So before we look at how passkeys transform the user experience, let's look at one example of customer experience transformation that everybody knows. And that is getting somewhere across your city when you don't have a car. Historically, we would do that in a taxi. And of course, you know where this is going. So we're going to see a before and after. Before rideshare, when you had to use a taxi, there were lots of steps. Finding a place taxis might be, hailing the taxi, explaining to the cab driver where you want to go. You have to kind of understand what the costs are. That step number 5 is kind of essential because we don't have teleportation yet. You have to actually travel. So that's pretty essential and can't be removed. But all these other steps, understanding what the cost is and then paying, handing cash, getting change, waiting for the credit card, all these other steps are involved. So after that experience was transformed, we have a very unique first step. And this is important because it happens in a lot of digitally transformed customer experiences, that you have to enroll in the service. And you do that one time, but doing that one-time enrollment allows for such a simpler experience going forward. So with rideshares, as opposed to taxis, you just book your journey. And part of that booking includes where you're going, what the costs are, and what your wait time is going to be. Then you travel, because you can't get rid of that step. And then you arrive. It's much, much simpler. So let's look at what it means to transform the authentication experience. This is a really common interface that everybody in the world is used to. A username field, a password field, and a button to submit your username and password. So if we look at the before and after here, there's a lot going on. Even that step 1, you might take for granted, but you have to remember your username. There's a lot of churn and abandonment that happens from people not remembering what their username was. You have to type that username correctly, which doesn't always happen well. You have to remember your password, then you have to type it correctly, which, by the way, 40 to 65% of people have to retype their password and or username because they get it wrong, which is also a source of abandonment of that sign-in. Then ultimately you submit. If you just compile what all those actions take, it's about 40 clicks and taps and things you have to get right. And we didn't even show the process to use a username and password plus a code that's sent to your text message. That would require double or more than double the number of steps. If we look at after this authentication experience with passkeys being deployed, there's that really important step that's highlighted in yellow. To use a passkey, you first have to create a passkey for the service. And for each individual service, that's a one-time step. But that's essential. You have to go through that process. And a lot of the guidelines, we'll get into those later, explain what are the optimal ways to enroll people into using a passkey. But once that passkey is created, you can use it to sign in with one step, which we call a gesture. So the scenario is, I go to a website, autofill, if it's enabled, which most likely is, will automatically prompt you to use your device unlock. That would be a fingerprint, a face biometric, or PIN, and then you're authenticated through the protocol, the standards protocol, and you're signed in. So if you just compare the actions, 40 plus actions versus one action, it's incredibly simpler and definitely transformational. Now, just so you can see this happen, in case you haven't seen a passkey sign in, you can see both of them. On the right, you see a passkey sign in that's looping. So every time it completes, you'll see a check mark. So you can kind of just follow that on the right. We'll see it load here again. The autofill appears, I hit continue, I do my Face ID, and I'm in. Now the one on the left is the password sign in, so you have all those clicks and taps and et cetera, et cetera. And eventually, after we sign in, I think 6 or 7 or 8 times with the passkey on the right, you'll eventually get a check mark that you're signed in there on the left with the password. And there they are. So with that brief introduction, I'm going to hand it off to James.
Hey everyone, thanks Kevin. So my name is James, and I'm here to talk a little bit on why Microsoft is also all in on passkeys. So about 10 years ago, our identity systems found about, 115 password attacks per second. And now in 2024 is way beyond 4,000 per second. And of course, it's increased so much because it's still the easiest way for bad people to get into accounts. If we reduce the usage of passwords or even eliminate it completely, like you can today with Microsoft Account, we've further protected our customers. For people who've opted into this experience, we've completely removed that vector of potential attack. And we're also pretty familiar with passwordless options overall. So for years, we've sort of supported FIDO security keys and Windows Hello to sign into the web via WebAuthn. And in addition, our app-based notifications for signing in and have also been used for years. These are all great starts, but it could be better. It could be easier. It could be more secure and less phishing resistant. So that's why we believe that the best complement to a passwordless account is passkeys. That's why we're all in on passkeys. We love it because it's really easy to use, yet it's way more secure because it's more phishing resistant. We love that it's interoperable across different ecosystems. a passkey that you save on your iPhone, you can use to sign in onto an account on Windows, all without using a proprietary app and that only works for specific identity providers. And we love it because it will save us millions in SMS costs because it will reduce how many verification codes that we have to send out. And lastly, we also love it because it simplifies our overall recovery story. You won't need to enter the account recovery process if you never lose access to your account to begin with. A synced passkey on the platforms and credential managers ensure that we will always have access to all of our accounts without fear of losing access. And with that, I'm going to introduce Mitch again, and he will talk about a little bit on Google's on why they're all in on passkeys.
Thanks so much, James. I really appreciate that. And Google shares a lot of the same reasons, if not all the same reasons, for really loving passkeys. I think James touched on some really, really cool stuff there, especially like SMS cost savings, I think is a big opportunity. And also, just not losing access to the account in the first place and avoiding account recovery entirely. I think those are two really, really powerful points. And I think some of the reasons why we are all in, we remain all in, is that we've really been seeing like signs of success at Google. So passkeys have been used over 1 billion times across 400 million Google accounts, which is unbelievable scale. And we do like a lot of, we check in on that very often to make sure things are going well. And we do see that there is a lot of continued success with passkeys. We know that they're easy to use and they're phishing resistant, which is very, very important. And they're 50% faster than passkeys, or passwords, excuse me. Passkeys are 50% faster than passwords. And we know that through experiments that we've shared in the past, we know that speed is very important to our user base. And also, like, we've been seeing success from a lot of our friends across the industry as well. And here we have some great representation. We have eBay, Mercari, Amazon, 1Password, PayPal, Dashlane, Kayak, Yahoo, DocuSign, Uber, Shopify, and WhatsApp. These are all really, really important partners. And some of the numbers that we've seen are Dashlane seeing a 70% increase in conversion with passkeys, and Kayak users are signing in 50% faster than before. And these are really, really important numbers for getting your users from A to B. That's really great. And also, like at Google, one thing that we really believe is that passkeys are the only sustainable authentication method, and that covers a good few things. And the 2 points on the slide are two very important points, I think. So like lost passwords, they create support tickets, and that creates churn and cost for support teams. If you could avoid that completely, I think that's really, really helpful. And that's for enterprise, consumer, for any application. And also, as they're more phishing resistant than today's authentication methods, maybe, other systems like SMS or TOTP, we really feel that puts more users in more control of the access to their accounts, which is really, really important. And passkeys have accessibility built in. So I touched on this a little earlier, but the accessibility improvements that passkeys can offer are very powerful, again, because it hands off to the system. And so accessibility is essentially solved by the system one time, and then not every relying party has to solve accessibility through all the steps. And so that just improves efficiency in solving for accessibility, meaning more people can access your service more readily. Very important. And also, one thing is that authentication with passkeys, with the speed, ease of use, and then leaning into biometrics that users trust, it builds that trust in your service and in the platform. And it helps the user feel more comfortable and more ready to use products and services, which is very important. And because it's transparent, easy to follow, and hassle-free, it does build that trust over time. Because one thing we really believe in at Google is that feeling safe is as important as being safe. And so passkeys really help convey that feeling to our users. And we know that, again, as something as I kind of touched on a little earlier, but going into more detail, fast sign-in really wins users. Often the logic that I kind of interpret from looking at different kinds of feedback from all kinds of sources is that why would somebody bother signing in if they can get like 80%, a good approximation of an experience without signing in? Now, we as product owners, all across FIDO and everybody watching this, we know that if we're asking users to sign in, there's often like really good reasons for that. And we can support them the next time they want to do something. We can support them the first time they want to do something better than if they better when they're signed in than if they aren't. But again, if a user has like just one goal in mind and they're trying to get through your service, like why would they bother signing in if it's too difficult? And Passkeys really help us address that problem. And to kind of build on what Kevin was describing with the taxi metaphor, I have this kind of generalized sign-in journey for two-step verification, kind of, or multi-factor authentication, whatever way you would like to frame it today. And essentially, on the way this journey works today is that on your first device, like the device that you want to sign in on, you're providing the identifier, like your Google account email. Then you're entering your password, and then you're getting instructions for the second factor that you set up in the past. And this can be a wide variety of things, from a security key to a TOTP, to an SMS code, to a notification on your phone through an app. And so there's all kinds of things that can happen as a second step, making this like kind of a variable. And you need to maintain and support all of those different kinds of second steps. And then once you have done that, once you've gone through that kind of little bit of a sequence, then you can sign in. Awesome. And that's assuming you don't forget anything, you haven't lost anything, or nothing's going wrong. But with Passkeys, everything is happening on that first device, which is really great. So the device that you're on, which is awesome. So you provide the identifier, which is often optional or can be optional. And then you're either using biometric with the screen lock, and then in some cases, you might be kind of getting a passkey from your cell phone or something like that using a QR code. But I really feel strongly that when you're using the local device passkey, it's a really, really amazing experience. And you can see how the steps have been shaved down. So that's really powerful. Let's see. So Kevin, would you be willing to speak to the design guidelines?
But yeah, maybe I will. Thank you, Mitchell. Yeah, so you've registered for this webinar and want to get to the design guidelines. So let's look at what are in the design guidelines. And I also want to verify, in your interface for the webinar, you'll probably have a resources widget. And in the resources widget is a link to the design guidelines. I'm just going to say this several times in the next 5 minutes, that you can find the design guidelines at fidoalliance.org/design-guidelines. Again, it's fidoalliance.org/design-guidelines. So we have Mitchell from Google and James from Microsoft and myself here going through these guidelines, but it's important for you to know that there was a much bigger team and diverse team that brought all this work together. And so inside of the FIDO Alliance, there's a UX working group comprised of these 32 member companies. So we have designers, UX researchers, content strategists, accessibility specialists from these companies from all regions of the world, from different perspectives. So some of them are brands that sell products and services. Some of them are vendors within the identity space. And there are many platform providers like Apple, Google, Microsoft, and even other credential managers like 1Password, Dashlane, Bitwarden, etc. So just know and have trust that the design guidelines that we publish take into account these diverse perspectives from all these different kinds of companies and experts. Also, because we are so darn close to this subject matter, we also hire a third-party UX research firm. That firm is called Blink, and they have an army of cognitive psychologists that run this kind of research all the time. They also help us see our blind spots and ensure that we're not bringing our own biases to the research when we research these user experiences. And lastly, an important group of companies, there are 8 here, who helped underwrite the creation of the design guidelines. It does create an added cost to FIDO Alliance to produce these guidelines each year. I just want to, the logos are on screen, but I want to say the names of each company. So FIDO Alliance member underwriters include 1Password, Cisco Duo, Dashlane, Google, HID, Trusona, US Bank, and Yubico. Thank you, all of them, for their support and making this, this work happen. All right, the guidelines themselves. How do we produce this stuff? It's kind of important just to know also that there are so many possible moments in your end-to-end customer journey where passkeys can be applicable. We've documented hundreds of them. We ultimately, the group kind of boiled these hundreds of different moments across the customer journey into 7 themes. We look at those themes, we say, okay, let's select just a few, a very small subset. And we selected 6 to research and go deep on. And those are the 6 areas of the passkey experience that are in the new guidelines for 2024. Now, if you're comparing these numbers, like 270 possible things we can research and we only research 6, you might be thinking, how is that going to help me at all? How is that going to help my organization? You only scratch the surface. The reason we choose such a small number is because we like to go very, very deep on those 6, as opposed to choosing 60 and going very shallow. What we've learned over the course of time is that we try to find, and we have found the 6 that will be most impactful to your business. All right. Each year, in fact, each week, each day, there are more and more services that are deploying support for passkeys. And so we also audit a whole bunch of live deployments to see what they're doing, what new messaging they're using, what new iconography in system settings or navigation, like all sorts of different ways that companies are deploying their support for passkeys. We audit a handful of those to also inform our work. Ultimately, this working group within FIDO Alliance, we create prototypes. We build prototypes based on our educated assumptions and data. And then we take that to Blink and they run research against those prototypes. Now, we don't do that just one time. We do that cycle there in light blue 6 times. So that means we build prototypes, we put them in front of end users, Blink runs research on them to see what areas are working or not working. Then we go back to the drawing board, rebuild the prototype, rebuild the messaging, the UI, the content, then we test it again, and then we keep on going through that cycle 6 times. I think it is important to note that these guidelines are focused on consumer use cases. They're not focused on enterprise workforce use cases. Now, there's still a lot of applicability. If you've joined this webinar and you're really hoping to get guidelines for workforce employee authentication, you can still get a lot from the guidelines. But just know that all the use cases you're going to see in the guidelines are really focused on the consumer use case and also in unregulated industries. And then lastly, we had 8 patterns from prior years that we've published. So there's now a total of 14 design patterns that you can use to help drive your business outcomes. Again, you can get all 14. We'll actually have it on the slide coming up, fidoalliance.org/design-guidelines. Now, just so you know everything that's included in the guidelines, I've mentioned patterns a few times, but there's also more. There's some great, wonderful details about the user experience research that was conducted. And you'll see a lot of quotes from real users using passkeys for the first time. Hopefully those quotes are helpful to help you empathize with the mental models and things that people are thinking when they experience passkeys for the first time in the wild. There are also 10 UX principles and 3 content principles. And we say they're principles because they're not specific to any pattern. They're kind of truths, like user experience truths that can apply to a lot of different use cases and apply to all the different patterns. There's some wonderful ones in there about accessibility. There's just some, definitely look through the principles. When we get to the patterns, if you're new to considering the deployment of passkeys, it's possible that you might feel a little bit overwhelmed, like, where do I start? There's so much going on here. There's so many different options. And so what we've done this year is we have just 2 design patterns to get you started. And it's literally just those 2. You can deploy and use passkeys only by using these 2 guidelines. We call them get started design patterns. But then there's all the other optional patterns. And depending what your business needs are and the outcomes you're looking to drive, you can use different kinds of patterns. So for example, let's say the business driver at your company is really to reduce SMS OTP costs. Then we have a pattern for that. We have design guidelines for how to optimize that experience to reduce those SMS OTP costs. Or maybe you have, you already support security keys, and that's a big part of your security posture, and you want to add the ability to create synced passkeys. How do you combine or have the option of YubiKeys or hardware security keys and the software keys in the same interface? We have a pattern for that. So it's worth looking through the optional patterns as well. And then lastly, and that might be how you found this webinar to begin with, there's a whole bunch of resources. So this diverse group of people is pretty big. So there ends up being a fair amount of community participation and community events like webinars, speaking engagements, workshops, and things. Those are all listed within the design guidelines. We also have things like a Figma UI kit that you can download and use on your own and adapt to your own needs, and other resources to jumpstart your work with passkeys. So get all the guidelines. You now see the URL just printed there on screen, or you can scan this QR code. And I'm going to hand it off to James, and then we'll make some time for Q&A as well. James.
Thanks, Kevin. So I get to summarize why we should still all look into passkeys and all the opportunities it gives us. So in summary, password attacks are still growing, and if you want to protect your users, we got to get them off passwords. Passkeys reduce overall phishing, credential stuffing, and all available text surfaces and vectors. So if we have a passkey, it makes it a little bit easier, a little bit safer. Overall, for us, this is a really big one. We get to reduce our overall costs with SMS and IT support. Getting IT support to go on calls, messaging people to help them reset their passwords take time, and it's expensive for everyone. Overall, you can reduce abandonment in your overall flows. So if someone already has something in their cart, they've already downloaded an app, if we lower the overall friction for them to get through the process of signing in, we've just reduced overall abandonment. We can increase customer loyalty and retention by simply making it really easy for them to get back into the account that they've already created. And because passkeys increase the ease of use, accessibility overall for all people, and increased faster sign-in speeds. And because of all of these great things, especially for us at Microsoft, like our goal is to make passkey the default credential for Microsoft, at least for Microsoft consumer accounts. And we want to bring it to every single user on our platform. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to the last slide, where I believe Mitch is going to talk a little bit about all the different successes that these different companies have had so far.
Totally. Thanks, James. And I appreciate the summary too. It's good to get a reminder of like all the great stuff that we can achieve with these. And so we know that TikTok, for example, has a 97% login success rate now, which is incredible. considering the diversity of an audience of a social media app. 14% eligible user adoption rate. So for all the users that they have eligible for Passkeys, 14% of them are adopting. And I do think that's like as a result of like an initial presentation of Passkeys. And I think that could increase with campaigns quite quickly. And a 2% reduction in SMS OTP login. And so at TikTok scale, I'm sure that's very meaningful SMS cost savings around the world. Mercari, and I was able to meet a representative of Mercari when I was at the FIDO plenary a couple weeks ago, and they were really excited to share this information. But overall, their sign-in success has seen a 21% improvement, which is really cool. Like, I don't know what other kind of changes you could make to your sign-in to get a like 1/5 more successful sign-ins. That's really powerful stuff. And also, their authentication time has decreased from 17 seconds to 4.4 seconds. So for Mercari, they're seeing 4 times the speed for authentication. At Google, we're seeing like twice the speed. Yeah, we're effectively seeing that passkeys can be 50% faster than passwords. At least I think my math is right there. It's like 50%. That's what we were saying earlier. I don't know about twice, but something. And Mercari is seeing 4 times faster, which is really insane. That's incredible speed. Air New Zealand, 30% opt-in in 24 hours is wild. And a 4.7 times improvement time to complete improvement in success rate. And if you think about like Mercari and Air New Zealand here, and earlier how I was talking about how like speed wins sign-ins and users, like this really speaks to that, right? Like the speed can really help a user sign in and get to what they want, and you can support them better once they're signed in. And you can also support the return use cases. So there's really, really important user-facing benefits here. This benefits both you, but especially the user. 50% reduction in abandonment rates. Like if we think about what it takes to abandon, I know sometimes like a user might try to sign in and then they abandon because they're not that interested, but sometimes you really want to get in and it's a lot of work to get in. Like maybe you got to make a phone call, maybe you got to go through a whole account recovery process. Like all the time and frustration and effort with, your service, like trying to sign into your service, all that is saved, which is incredible. And reduced account recovery calls and call center attacks. That's really, really great. Like social engineering dropping like that. Wow, cool, amazing. And of course, we're seeing, big improvements at Google. We're seeing 50% sign-in time. And as I touched on earlier, we have 400 million passkeys that have been used, or 400 million Google accounts have used passkeys more than 1 billion times. I can't think of numbers that would sort of like prove the success of something more than something being used 1 billion times successfully. But yeah, thank you so much. I guess now it's time to jump into Q&A.
Here I am. Hello. That was great. I was hoping we were going to talk about that because the great thing about these numbers that we're looking at is that it's not just that they exist, it's that these companies are shouting them from the rooftops because they are so happy with the results that they are getting from their passkeys deployments. I don't know if many people on the line are in a marketing position or in a position where having to have to aggregate data from consumer services RPs, or if it's just me, but it's not that easy to come by. But in this case, it is, because these results are kind of speak for themselves. But sharing them, these folks are really excited to do, and we have way more statistics that folks are giving us as well, and it's really exciting. But on that note, so there is one type of data point that someone is asking about, and I actually am interested in knowing if maybe Mitchell or James at Google or Microsoft respectively, you're looking at this, which is when you are prompting for folks to enroll in Passkeys, is there have you been tracking that success rate? And then how have you made changes to that, enrollment process, or the prompts or imagery or words used there in order to raise that number? And the second part of that question is kind of like, is the UX working group planning to provide any guidelines around that, like increasing that metric?
Thank you so much, Megan. I think I can speak to part of that question, and then I might tap in Kevin to speak to the FIDO UX Working Group future, and then also James, if James has anything to add. But I know that at Google, what we presented at conferences before is that we've really been exploring how we're using our language to encourage a user to adopt passkeys, and also the kinds of screens that we're presenting to users to encourage them, again, to enroll and adopt passkeys. And we have found that for Google's users, specifically Google users, we haven't done research in any other industries. We know that speed is very appealing, which is why I was touching on like the topic of speed so much at the top, because we have found through experimentation and research that speed is what matters to Google users specifically. And so I think that what this speaks to is the broad and general guidance that we've always given, which is when you are in a specific industry or you're trying to meet the needs of a specific cohort or group, that finding out what meets their needs, what's appealing to them, be it security, be it speed, be it convenience, be it biometrics, be it like, not falling into account recovery, be it not having to remember a password and instead having your sort of device handle the whole thing. You might need to sort of like get in touch with your audience and figure out what's most appealing to them. And then Kevin, I think there was a part of that question about does the FIDO UX Working Group intend to create like specific guidance around that?
Well, it's a great question because just earlier today, and let me make sure that you can still hear me all right.
Yes.
Okay, good. So my video might be frozen. Yeah, just earlier today, we were looking at what are the next use cases that the UX Working Group may research. So well, we don't have a definitive, I mean, Mitchell and I are co-chairs of the working group. We don't have a definitive answer of where we're going to go next for the areas that we research. But we're always looking for the most high impact, most broadly applicable design patterns that we could publish. And if we continue to get a lot of interest in non-consumer use cases or financial services use cases that was mentioned in the Q&A, then certainly we will address those too. I'm typing up a response, and it may be related to the question about enrolling elderly clients. And I'll post the response here in just a few minutes, but I do want to emphasize again that even though we focus these design guidelines initially on consumer, on regulated markets, they are very applicable to many other different kinds of use cases. So many of these design guidelines and interface guidelines and messaging guidelines are applicable also to workforce or regulated industries. So I wouldn't let that stop you from at least becoming familiar with the guidelines, because they could probably still help you.
Just wanted to mention that, I mean, we've said that passkeys are just more accessible than passwords and usernames and all the entering of all these different characters. And so I would imagine, especially with more elderly customers, it probably does the same thing, as in it's like it utilizes what they're familiar with. Ideally, they have something protecting their devices. And so if they're familiar with that, then they just use that same mechanism to sign in. So I imagine it being something easier than, well, usernames and passwords.
Yeah, I actually got that question at Identiverse about, when you, so it's kind of a two-pronged question. It's elderly folks, but it's often folks that might be managed by another individual, like accounts that might be managed by another individual as well. So like, let's say your parents or, someone else that you might have power of attorney over or something like that, where you both need access to an account. Can passkeys accommodate scenarios such as that? And the answer is yes, but I don't know if anybody wanted to expand on that at all.
Yeah, I can touch on that. And Megan, I really appreciate sort of like the up-leveling of effectively like a managed account, or an account that you have control of or managing on behalf of somebody else. Or the idea of somebody, I think, James, like you mentioned this, like somebody with different needs might need access to their account, and how passkeys can support that. I think that I don't think I can be specific about specific cases that we've looked into, but I do know that this is something that we care about a lot, and it's something that we're trying to understand better at Google. One thing I can touch on is that once the feature has been demonstrated in certain cases, it's really easy for folks to sort of like think, oh, okay, if I can sign in using like Face ID or Touch ID or like, a face scan, anything like that, any biometric, and that's a transferable skill that they can use to sign into their Google account or other accounts. That's really, really appealing. I think for a cohort that is interested in that kind of ease of access, the challenge is really sort of like just introducing it to them in a way that helps them understand. And so then I think that Megan, like one thing you touched on, of course, was like managed accounts. I think like going through that route and finding a way to convey that to the people who are managing the accounts, or finding a way, if your user base does skew older, or you have like a cohort of older members, if you have a way to address them directly, maybe then it might be beneficial to sort of share the convenience or speed or ease of use, and the fact that maybe they don't have to interact so much with like a fiddly touch keyboard. So there is, I'm sure that there's pathways forward, but I don't think, I'm certain there's pathways forward to help these users.
Yeah. And just from an accessibility perspective, I'm not sure if many folks, if you, Mitchell, or James, or Kevin have assisted, or anyone on the webcast have assisted parents or grandparents or folks of older age in password managers or FIDO security keys versus passkeys, synced passkeys, because I have, and yeah, it's definitely much more simple to explain and also to enroll. And those things are like password manager plus a security key is a great form of security, of course. And there was a question about why we don't recommend security keys to broad swaths of consumers. And really it's that security keys, the cost of them and the implementation of them for large consumer bases is not user-friendly enough to deploy at scale for consumer use cases. So workforce use cases are different, but for consumer use cases, leveraging platform authenticators and passkeys is the way that we recommend moving forward.
I agree. And just
Yeah,
to
for
build
sure.
on that, Megan, I think I know that at Google, like we're adding passkeys to our super high security advanced protection program. We're adding passkeys to our two-step verification program for these reasons. And it's not only sort of just the security, but it's also passkeys are very accessible for these users. There's no barrier to entry in areas where their currency might not go very far, and a security key might be very expensive for them. They can still get that excellent security and great experience. And I'm sorry, James. I think I might have kind of jumped in too fast.
No worries. I was just going to mention, like, you can, if you are more security conscious, and you can still totally get like a security key and save your passkey on that. But what does everyone have in their pocket nowadays? It's a phone. So if we want more adoption, then we try to utilize whatever the platform authenticator is. So a lot of this research is focused on what is available to most people at most times.
Right. And of course, if you're a prosumer, like many of us are, I use security key like for certain use cases. I use passkeys for other use cases. I use a security key for advanced protection, for example, but I use a sync passkey for Amazon, for another example. So it's not like a one or nothing kind of proposition. If you are a consumer who really likes technology, you can increase your security with physical security keys too. There are just many, many questions. So this is actually a really interesting question around, so we talk about like how many accounts can enroll a passkey. I know we have numbers that we estimate around that. But in terms of like actual deployment and determining eligibility of your user base, and I know this is more like a little more in the weeds of a deployment, but it does have, UX and implications, and like you don't want to prompt folks that aren't eligible, right, to sign up for a passkey, for example. So is there what other best practices for determining eligibility, and then are there ways to raise that number of eligible accounts? And maybe we define what we mean by eligible for the audience, if that's not a common vernacular.
I think like James and Kevin, I might lean on you both for this one, but eligibility, as I would interpret it, is sort of like technical eligibility. Like, is their device capable or set up to use a screen lock? Is it using, is the operating system updated enough to sort of have the latest FIDO 2 tech built in? Does that sound right to you both?
Yep. Up to me, it does.
Yeah, cool. And so I think something that would be very interesting, right, is if I know that when Google always tries to make sure that the person that we're asking to enroll in the passkey is eligible. So we try and use the information that we have we just sort of look at the browser and the operating system, and we try to make a decision on, okay, is this person eligible for passkeys or likely to be eligible for passkeys? And that's sort of like how we begin to make a choice. James, do you have any additional thoughts on that?
No, that sounds about right. At least with Microsoft, depending on what version of Windows, you can still save a passkey. Let's say on Windows 10, just won't sync. It'll stay there. So in terms of the eligibility for different accounts, I don't know if we on our end are making distinctions where we're like, it seems like it is hard to check hardware to see it specifically if they can do it. So, but because we have a goal to enroll everybody, we're still going to ask and just try to get that out there. Because I believe there's a crazy amount of Android devices that are compatible. Most Windows devices are as well, and then I'm sure all Apple devices are. And so we're just making the assumption that most people are eligible. And if that's not the case, we do have fallback mechanisms where we can go back to either an authenticator app or other better than password mechanisms to sign in, but still not as good as passkeys.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I think that. Oh, sorry, Kevin, please.
Oh, just two things came to mind for the device eligibility. Within the guidelines, you'll see a link. In each of the patterns, there's a section for code, and it links to a website that's also created by FIDO Alliance members and members of the W3C. And it's called passkeys.dev. At passkeys.dev, there's a wonderful resource that you'll want to take a look at for this question. And it's a matrix of all the support across operating systems and very specific browser types by each operating system. So just want to make sure you know that's there. Once you find it, you'll reference it quite often. It's a very popular page. Again, it's passkeys.dev, and within there, there's a matrix for device support. One other thing I want to mention on this topic of how to determine an eligibility, when we look at if there's a company that's looking at deploying support for passkeys, they typically follow this 5-phase journey. And the first phase really doesn't necessarily start with code or design. It really starts with just identifying the need and documenting those types of topics around what devices are people using, where are the sign-ins that the business feels is most important to deploy support for initially. So just something also to keep in mind that that's a big part of the process that every company goes through, is determining that strategy and looking at their own unique business needs, because every company is a little different, and what devices and browsers and systems and tasks that people have are all different from every company.
Thank you. There's a bunch of, so I just want to close out on this question. There's a few questions around the research. Was there a particular age breakdown in the research that we've done over the past multiple years? And or is there interest in perhaps like looking at particular age groups for Passkeys research? And again, this was more targeted to like doing research just with older populations, for example.
Yeah, I speak to that a little bit, and then welcome James and Mitchell. Within the working group and at FIDO Alliance, our research always covers the span from 18 years old to 70. And so in addition, other research, formal usability research that I've done has seen that adoption and satisfaction with this new authentication mechanism is even a little bit higher with the older population. So a few years ago, even studying the web authent experience, which was just prior to Passkeys, but very similar, older populations did not show any like significant challenges with the experience. And in some cases, there was a higher satisfaction even with the older population.
Something I have sort of observed, I don't know if it's still the case now. I know with some people in the older population, there is some hesitation overall to using biometrics, with them thinking that it's, especially if you're using it to sign into a website, now they might believe the website has access to these things. But yeah, it's it'd be an interesting challenge to, especially for those folks, to help them get over the fact that these biometrics stay on the device. All these credentials are stay nice and safe over here. How do we overcome that for some of these people and get them to know how it actually works, if that was the case?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that gets raised to me the most when I'm doing talks around passkeys, even from folks that are in the tech industry, is, well, what about the biometrics? And I do remember, Kevin, if you remember this as well, it was a few years ago doing our user panels, and I watched several of them, and what I observed is that initial concern over biometrics was totally absolved once they understood that the biometric wasn't being shared either with the with the operating system or the service that they were signing into. And they were like, oh, well, in that case. And so I think that led to the little bit of content that we say to provide around the biometrics, not leaving the device or not being sent over the wire, or however we describe that. But that is the one thing that I think when we talk about, oh, like, we don't want to talk too deep into tech with consumers necessarily, unless they want to dig into it. But that biometrics piece is actually very critically important to at least convey in a short, pithy sentence, because there is a lot of concern about where that biometrics being stored or who's being given to.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'd like to try to paste the LinkedIn, but if you go to some of the principles, it talks to like what there's some principles and content principles related to how to address this very issue within the design guidelines. And the issue is that there is a percentage of the population, old and young, that have the misconception that the website now has access to their biometrics. So we've tested this extensively, like different messages to communicate that simply. And you'll find that within the design guidelines, and specifically within the 3 content principles. So definitely check out the principles section.
Well, thank you. And so we're going to wrap up. If we didn't get to your question, there are some in there that I will reply to because they're quite straightforward. And if they're not, we'll carry into next week. But can Kevin, Mitchell, or James, or whoever wants to be on the spot, give a little sneak peek into what folks can expect from next week's webinar?
I have to go remind myself. Oh, yes. No, I know. It just took me a moment. So next week, we have Court, who's a content strategist from Google. We have Elizabeth, who's a content strategist from Intuit. And then we have Leo, who is a senior designer at MasterCard. And they're going to go into the depths of the guidelines themselves. So while today was a little bit more of an introduction, they're going to get right into the guidelines themselves and go into the depths of how their companies have used the guidelines and adapted them to their own needs.
Well, I'm excited for that. I hope you all will join us for that webinar. I hope today's foundational webinar and kickoff to the series was very beneficial to you. I thank you all so much for attending and for the great questions. Thank you to Kevin, Mitchell, and James for this great presentation and all of your work in the UX working group, of course, and always. And please do stay on and take the survey. And hopefully we'll see you next week on part 2 of this 4-part webinar series. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.